code 11405 would not be appropriate to assign for this particular case?
Well, it's not in the integumentary section, and I'm trying to figure out what it replaced.
Let me get there too. And then I can, so 11405. It's definitely not the integumentary system. The integumentary system is the outer layer of skin, right? Now, this is a excision. In our descriptor or our guidelines, it's telling us it's a benign lesion. We had a tumor, right? We had a tumor. In our descriptor, it is telling us that it's over 4 centimeters. But again, this is not something that is on the integumentary system. When we're talking in this particular procedure that was performed, it's intermuscular. Some of the terminology in that operative note told us that it was interfascia, which is what they call it, which is intermuscular. And if you didn't know that that interfascia meant intermuscular, that's where that medical dictionary comes in handy. Okay? All right. Yeah.
All right, you gave him a code 11, what, 405?
405.
How did you know to find that code?
How did I know where?
No, how did David know?
Oh, I actually gave it to him.
You
So-
told him the code, but did you tell him what it was good for?
No, I just had him look it up. When you go into the separate sections in the CPT, they're numerical. Except for those resequence codes, they are numerical. So you start out, of course, that evaluation and management, they're all 99 codes. And that's the only one that really is kind of out of whack, I'll say, because you've got the 99 in the very front of the book. But then they start at 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s. So you can actually kind of go through and sequentially get from bodily system to bodily system, because each bodily system, do you see it? Each bodily system is broken down into its own section with its own numerical factor. Okay. Okay, so my girlfriend this past week had a baby. She had a cesarean. She had to have anesthesia. What's the code? Yes. Cesarean delivery only. And our anesthesia codes are in the front of the CPT manual after that EM section. But they start us with the 0 zeros, and then we go into the 1s. How many possible codes could we have for this?
4.
4?
Yep.
All righty. Do you have our code?
Actually looking them up right
You're
now.
looking them up in the main
Yeah.
section?
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, no, this,
You got it? What is it?
well, I mean, I'm gonna pick 01961.
Absolutely correct.
Bingo!
Yay!
Yes. I hope it was smooth.
But you selected that code based upon the information that you were given, right? I mean, if you think about it and you look at that, we didn't have a hysterectomy involved. We didn't have, so when I talk about matching up the code with your information the best that you can based on these descriptors, that's CPT coding. That's CPT coding. It's a little bit, I have quite a few students that actually prefer this method over ICD because they're gray. But there's gray in this too. I mean, seriously, there's gray in this too. But whether you decide that you like to apply the outpatient side of services or the inpatient, you know, in different healthcare organizations, they have what they call Coder 1, Coder 2, Coder 3. So typically, in a healthcare organization, a Coder 3 applies the CPT. Coder 2 applies essentially just the ICD, and a Coder 1 applies both. So keep that in mind, depending on the organization too. But I like CPT. I think it's fun. I know, I'm a nerd.
So, 19.
Which one is it?
01960. Is it a follow signature?
The one above it? 01960?
63.
63? We didn't have the hysterectomy. So can you see where we do have the cesarean mentioned there, but we didn't have a hysterectomy performed at the same time, so. What's that? No more children, exactly. Okay, so now, let's see. Let's try this one. An excision of a benign lesion on the chest, 0.4 centimeters with simple closures. You've got the information right there too. You can get slide 15. We've got 3 here that we're going to try from the integumentary system. We were actually just in that section, weren't we? Little deja vu. We've got a measurement there too. Keep that in mind. Sit 11400. 11400. Let me get there. I'm ready, but I'm like, doo-doo. particular code?
I almost looked at the
What was it?
4.0, and then I realized that the point was in the front of the 4, so.
Instead of the.
Yeah, I had to pay attention to that, yeah.
You do.
Yeah,
And that's
I caught
when I said
myself,
those
and I'm like, no,
measurements
it's
come
this
into effect, or the time.
Yeah,
This is a great example of that, because it's easy to transpose those numbers. So this is where detail is in the pudding, as they say, right? All right, so since we're in the integumentary system already, why don't we take a look at this next one, a suture of superficial wounds of the cheek. We've got 3 different measurements here. And I know that we haven't yet gotten into the integumentary system. But typically, when you have different lacerations like this, you add the measurements across the board. So we've got, you add the measurements when it comes to, so we would have the 1, 3, and 2. So what's that equal? 6, right? So we're looking at 6 centimeters of repair. We're adding. And like I said, I know we haven't gotten into the integumentary system yet, but that is typically in this particular or that particular system, you're adding the measurements when it comes to repair. In some of the coding that's applied, they have what they consider margins around a particular repair or an incision, and the CPT tells you which codes that applies to, where you have to actually calculate in your margins as well. What would a margin be? It's
so you would add them up?
for the repair, for the laceration, yes,
Oh.
you would add them.
12014.
1, 2, 0,
14.
1, 1,
14.
1, 4. 1, 2, 0. 1, 2, 0. Works for me.
Mention here.
What's that?
Mention here.
Is it on there?
Yeah.
Did I put it on there?
Oh, yeah.
There you go. I'm not even
Oh, I
looking at
didn't
the
see
right
it.
slide then. I didn't see it. Well, then everybody should be yelling it out. See, I got a different one, so it doesn't have it, it's got it on the next page, I'm sure.
And how did you come up with that? Yeah, isn't it supposed to be cheap?
Wait a minute, so we've got the sum of the lengths, and then we've got where we have the superficial. Now, superficial would give us an indication that it's a simple repair. When we get into certain, the guidelines for each of those specific sections, integumentary is one of them, where they have, different terms where they call simple, intermediate, they break it down by complexity that's involved. And you'll see in some of the descriptors, if it's a repair that is really, again, keep in mind we're resource-based here. This is all resource-based. So if you have a particular repair that is more complex than a simple repair, it's going to take more time, more resources. So there are specific definitions for each of those terms. And simple would indicate superficial, or superficial would indicate simple, so. All right. So our next one is pretty much done here. Let's take a look at this, do I have the answer to this code in there too? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But can anyone tell me what, so Jane's playing volleyball in our high school gymnasium, and during a drive for the ball, she fell, landing hard on her right shoulder area. She's presented to the orthopedic office in severe pain in the area of her collarbone. Radiologic exams were taken, and it was determined that the sternoclavicular joint was dislocated. The physician applied pressure to move the bone back into location. What did he do right there? Can anyone tell me what he just did?
Popped it back into place.
Okay. Manipulated. So we gotta, when we're actually starting to, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. now. So when we're applying these codes, we have to start thinking, you know, for those acronyms and synonyms, because if it's one particular term, it may actually mean, so, in taking a look at what he did, he was manipulating, right? Pop it back into place. So I just want to get you warmed up to that sometimes some of the terminology, ICD-10, the PCS, the procedural coding system, breaks down root operations, that's what they call them, into 31 different, is everyone familiar with that? There's 31 different root operations in ICD. I'm going to pass along some of the resources for that, because those terms, where they're synonymous, it breaks it down in one of the glossaries like you would not believe in ICD-10. And it applies to CPT as well. So I'll share that resource with everybody, because it sometimes getting those synonymous terms or really understanding by thinking, well, what are they doing? You know, when you're doing this every day, that recall, you can benefit from that. But when you're just getting warmed up and you're just getting started in CPT coding, whatever resources you need to use, because they are beneficial to get that terminology fixed into your memory. But you don't have to remember everything. That's key. That's key. Okay, so a little overview to the CPT is, of course, you know, in each section you're going to have a list of guidelines. And sometimes in each subsection you have more guidelines. Again, check it out. Because if you're not allowed to do something, or you are allowed to do something, or there's little hints, tips, tricks, the CPT will indicate it for you. It will be there. So you want to make sure that, again, those eyes are going up and going down. I'm going to drive you all nuts with that statement by the end of the semester. Of course, when you are in or using the index, you want to locate those subterms. And then you want to follow any cross-references. You'll see different notes. You know, it could be see this, see that, do this, do that. Again, jot down those codes, the standalone codes or the code ranges, and then check them out in the main section. Most of the codes in the CPT manual are standalone codes, but there are quite a few code ranges as well. And then you want to make sure that you're applying the appropriate code, any modifier that applies, and of course, any add-on codes that are noted. I don't expect you for the first few weeks to start applying modifiers as well, because when we start to get into it, some of the codes are what they call bilateral codes, especially when we get into specific sections, and a procedure is performed that they know is a bilateral procedure. Our documentation will tell us that it's bilateral, but the code, that option will also be available to us. If it's a bilateral code, but a unilateral was performed, what do you think? We'd have to append a modifier to state that it was a lesser service. Of course, if it was a unilateral code and we had a bilateral procedure performed, we would either append the 50, which is the modifier for bilateral, or the LT or RT, depending. If we had a Medicare patient, we would use the HCPC modifiers. There is a list of the HCPC modifiers in here, and as well as the AMA. So if a person's eligible for Medicare, they're typically what age? 65 and older. So again, we would know, depending on the patient's health information, their insurance, what modifier we would use. If they're a Medicare, we would use the HCPC modifiers, because Medicare is the payer for that particular patient. Right?